listeners to our channel. We're so glad you've joined us for another captivating tale. If you enjoy stories that tug at your heartstrings and inspire, please consider subscribing and letting us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now settle in, get cozy, and prepare to embark on a journey of resilience and survival. Our story begins in a place of warmth and boundless affection, a home where every corner hummed with the gentle rhythm of a life well loved. Buster, a golden retriever of impeccable lineage and even more impeccable charm, knew only comfort. His days were a symphony of sunbeams on the living room rug, the rhythmic thud of a tennis ball against a wall, and the delighted squeals of the two children, 8-year-old Lily and 10-year-old Tom, who considered him their furry four-legged sibling. His bed, a plush donut of memory foam, cradled him each night, while gourmet kibble, occasionally supplemented with a dollop of peanut butter or a slice of roast chicken, filled his bowl. Life was a constant stream of belly rubs, long walks in the park, and the comforting presence of his humans. Buster was, by all accounts, a prince in his domain. His fur, a shimmering cascade of gold, was regularly brushed to perfection. His teeth gleamed from daily dental treats, and his eyes, deep pools of chocolate brown, reflected an unshakable contentment. He was part of the fabric of the Miller family, an indispensable thread woven into their daily existence. Holidays were a particular joy for Buster. The excited chatter, the flurry of packing, the promise of new scents and adventures. This time, however, felt different. A subtle tension permeated the air. Suitcases were being packed, but there was no joyous anticipation in his humans' voices when they spoke of vacation. Instead, hushed tones and worried glances were exchanged. Buster, with his keen canine senses, picked up on the shift. He nudged Lily's hand with his wet nose, seeking reassurance, but she merely stroked his head distractedly, her brow furrowed. The morning of their departure arrived, cloaked in a strange solemnity. Buster, usually a bundle of excited wiggles at the sight of car keys, lay quietly by the front door, observing. He watched as the luggage was loaded, then as Lily and Tom hugged him tighter than usual, their small faces etched with a sadness he couldn't quite comprehend. His human mother knelt, her voice thick with emotion. "Be a good boy, Buster. Mrs. Henderson will take good care of you. We'll be back soon." Mrs. Henderson, a kind-faced woman with a penchant for brightly colored cardigans, arrived shortly after. She was a familiar presence, having looked after Buster during shorter trips. But this time, as the car pulled out of the driveway, carrying his beloved family away, a cold knot of dread tightened in Buster's stomach. The house, once vibrant with life, suddenly felt vast and eerily silent. Mrs. Henderson, though pleasant, was not his asterisk family. Her touch was gentle, her voice calm, but it lacked the familiar resonance of Lily's giggle or Tom's boisterous commands. Buster wandered from room to room, his nose twitching, searching for the scent of his humans, a comforting trace of their presence. Each empty room echoed with their absence, amplifying the growing sense of unease within him. He settled by the window, watching the street, a silent vigil, his heart heavy with an unfamiliar longing. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, these were the only sounds filling the void where laughter and love usually resided. He tried to tell himself they would be back, just as his human mother had promised, but an instinct, deep and primal, whispered a different story. Something felt profoundly wrong. This wasn't just another vacation. This was different. The first few days without his family were a blur of restless pacing and polite interactions with Mrs. Henderson. Buster ate his food, went for his walks, and even indulged in a brief game of fetch, but his heart wasn't in it. His ears were constantly pricked, listening for the familiar rumble of the Miller's car, his tail offering only half-hearted wags. Mrs. Henderson, A creature of routine tried her best, but she couldn't fill the void left by his family's vibrant energy. She'd leave the back door ajar for a few moments while she brought in groceries, or momentarily forget to latch the gate after a quick trip to the garden. These small lapses, negligible in the presence of his humans, now registered as potential opportunities in Buster's increasingly restless mind. He wasn't thinking of escape in a dramatic sense. Rather, it was a primal urge to find them, to follow the fading scent of his beloved family. He yearned for their touch, their scent, their voices, and his instinct told him they were no longer within the confines of this house. The house, once his sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. One afternoon, a week into his family's absence, Mrs. Henderson was particularly distracted. A phone call, urgent and lengthy, had her pacing the kitchen, her voice a low murmur. Buster watched her from his vantage point on the living room rug, his keen golden eyes tracking her every movement. He noticed the back door, usually securely latched, was slightly ajar, a sliver of sunlight beckoning from outside. He had seen her step out just moments before to check on her own prize-winning roses in a small pot she kept on the patio, then returned to answer the ringing phone, leaving the door unlatched. A faint breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, distant exhaust fumes, and, beyond that, the tantalizing, elusive scent of the open world. It was a familiar scent, one he associated with his daily walks, but today it promised something more. A path, a direction, a chance to reconnect with the missing pieces of his harp. Slowly, deliberately, Buster rose. He moved with a quiet stealth unusual for his normally boisterous nature. Each paw step was measured, his golden fur barely rustling. He walked towards the kitchen, his gaze fixed on that slender opening. He could hear Mrs. Henderson's muffled voice, punctuated by the occasional clatter of a pot as she tidied up while still on the phone. Her back was turned, her attention wholly consumed by the conversation. This was his chance. He nudged the door with his nose, the gap widening just enough for him to slip through. He didn't run, didn't bark, didn't even glance back. His focus was singular, forward. He stepped onto the familiar patio, then onto the manicured lawn. The world outside felt vast and exhilarating, yet terrifyingly unfamiliar without his family by his side. He sniffed the air, trying to pick up any trace, any whisper of their passage. The scent of their car, faint but still detectable, led him towards the gate. It too was unlatched, swinging slightly in the gentle breeze, another oversight by the preoccupied Mrs. Henderson. With a final push of his head, Buster was through. He was free, or so he thought. The suburban street stretched out before him, lined with familiar houses and blooming flower beds, but it felt entirely alien. He was no longer a pampered pet within the secure confines of his yard. He was a lone explorer on an uncertain quest. The thrill of escape was quickly replaced by a surge of trepidation. Where were they? Which way should he go? The world suddenly felt much larger, and he, a small golden speck within it, had no map, only instinct. He took a deep breath, his nostrils flaring, trying to discern a direction from the myriad of smells. The scent of his family, though faded, seemed to pull him towards the west, towards the setting sun, towards the unknown. He started walking, his tail held low, a silent prayer in his heart that each step would bring him closer to the warmth he so desperately missed. The familiar suburban street, usually a canvas of children's laughter and the distant drone of lawnmowers, now stretched before Buster like an endless, silent corridor. Each house, with its neatly trimmed hedges and pristine lawns, seemed to stare back at him with an unnerving indifference. He trotted along the sidewalk, his ears swiveling, trying to decipher the strange quietness. This wasn't the quiet of a peaceful afternoon at home. This was the quiet of absence, a heavy blanket muffling the usual sounds of life. He passed Mrs. Henderson's house, now just another indistinguishable dwelling in a long line of them. He didn't look back. His focus was solely on the path ahead, driven by an unwavering, albeit misguided, hope that his family would magically appear around the next corner. The scent of their car, a faint but persistent echo, seemed to lead him onward, pulling him deeper into the labyrinth of streets he vaguely recognized from his daily walks. But without his humans to guide him, the familiar landmarks seemed to lose their meaning. The large oak tree at the park entrance, the quirky mailbox shaped like a cat, the brightly painted swing set, they were all just objects now, devoid of the joyful associations they once held. He tried to remember the turns his human father would take, the routes Lily and Tom would race him down, but the memories were hazy, tangled in the fog of his burgeoning confusion. His once trusting worldview was beginning to unravel. The world was not just his backyard in the park. It was vast and indifferent. Cars whizzed by, their drivers oblivious to the lost golden retriever trotting determinedly on the sidewalk. A young woman walking her poodle pulled her dog closer, her eyes wary. Buster, usually friendly and eager for a greeting, simply kept his pace, a new wariness settling in his own heart. He realized, with a jolt of canine instinct, that he was no longer a pet on a leashed walk. He was alone, an anomaly in this ordered world. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The shadows lengthened, stretching like long, grasping fingers across the pavement. The initial surge of adrenaline from his escape began to wane, replaced by a growing weariness. His paws, accustomed to comfortable strolls, ached from the continuous pavement. His stomach, usually filled with a timely dinner, began to rumble with an unfamiliar emptiness. The last time he'd eaten was at lunchtime a few hours ago, and already the hunger gnawed at him. He passed by a garbage can, its metallic scent hinting at forgotten treasures, but his upbringing had instilled in him a strict aversion to scavenging. He hesitated, then trotted on, his dignity still intact, even if his stomach wasn't. The streetlights flickered on, casting pools of artificial light that seemed to swallow the natural twilight. The familiar hum of the neighborhood settling down for the evening began. Doors closed, curtains were drawn, and the inviting glow of family life emanated from windows. Each glimpse into a warm, lit interior was a fresh stab of longing for his own home, for the familiar faces and comforting routines he had so carelessly left behind. He imagined Lily reading him a bedtime story, Tom sneaking him a piece of toast under the table, his human mother's gentle hand stroking his head as he drifted off to sleep. The images flickered in his mind, sharp and painful. Where were they? Why hadn't they come for him? He was lost, and the chill of the coming night was not just in the air, but in his very soul. He found himself at a crossroads, literally and figuratively. The street he was on dead-ended into a denser, less familiar area, where houses were spaced further apart and the streetlights were fewer. To his left lay a main road, a river of roaring metal beasts. To his right, a path that seemed to curve into a dark thicket of trees, an entrance to what looked like a small, undeveloped patch of woods he'd never explored. His instinct, dulled by confusion and weariness, was screaming for comfort, for home, but home was nowhere in sight. The world had grown cold, vast, and indifferent. He stood there, a golden figure against the encroaching darkness, a silent testament to a journey just beginning. The darkness descended swiftly, a heavy, suffocating cloak that swallowed the last vestiges of twilight. Buster, standing at the edge of the unfamiliar woods, felt a shiver ripple through his golden fur, a shiver that was as much from fear as from the encroaching cold. The air, crisp and hinting at the coming autumn, now bit with a sharp, unexpected chill. He glanced back at the dwindling streetlights, their distant glow offering little comfort. The sounds of the suburban evening, a television murmuring, a distant dog barking, the faint laughter of children seemed to mock his solitude. He was an outsider now, a creature of the wild, thrust into a world he was ill-equipped to navigate. The woods loomed before him, a wall of shadows and rustling leaves. He'd only ever ventured into manicured parks or carefully supervised nature trails. This was different. This was raw, untamed, and utterly terrifying. Yet the thought of returning to the exposed streets, where cars roared by like metallic predators and every human face was a stranger, was equally daunting. The woods offered concealment, a primal promise of shelter. With a hesitant whine, a sound barely audible even to himself, Buster pushed through the undergrowth. Twigs snapped beneath his paws, each sound amplified in the profound silence of the forest. The familiar scent of damp earth and decaying leaves was overlaid with new, unsettling odors, the musky smell of unseen animals, the sharp tang of pine, the faint, earthy aroma of something ancient and wild. He moved deeper, his senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch, sent a jolt of adrenaline through his weary body. He was no longer the brave, confident dog who chased squirrels with joyful abandon. He was a vulnerable creature, acutely aware of his place in the food chain. The hunger pangs in his stomach grew more insistent, a constant, dull ache that reminded him of his dire situation. He'd never known true hunger before, only the anticipation of his next meal. Now, it was annoying emptiness, a stark realization that his survival depended entirely on himself. He sniffed at the ground, hoping for some miraculous discovery, a forgotten tree, a dropped sandwich, but there was nothing but dirt and leaves. The forest offered no easy answers. He continued to walk, his legs growing heavy, his initial burst of adrenaline fading into bone-deep exhaustion. He needed shelter, a place to hide from the unseen eyes that he felt watching him from the depths of the trees. He spotted a large, fallen log, its underside creating a small, dark hollow. It wasn't much, but it offered a semblance of protection from the wind and the imagined threats. With a sigh that shuddered through his entire body, Buster curled into a tight ball, his nose tucked under his tail, trying to conserve every ounce of warmth. The cold seeped into his fur, chilling him to the bone. He had never been truly cold before, not like this. Even in winter, the Miller house was always warm, his bed a sanctuary of heat. Now, the damp earth beneath him offered no warmth, and the thin layer of his fur felt utterly inadequate against the biting air. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by starts and fearful whimpers. Every unfamiliar sound, the hoot of an owl, the distant cry of an unseen creature, the rustle of leaves in the wind, jolted him awake, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He dreamt of his warm bed, of Lily's gentle hand scratching behind his ears, of Tom's boisterous laughter. He dreamt of his food bowl, overflowing with delicious kibble. Each dream was a cruel reminder of the comfort he had lost, making the harsh reality of his situation even more painful upon waking. As the night wore on, the moon, a pale sliver in the vast, star-studded sky, cast long, eerie shadows that danced and twisted with the wind. Buster lay there, shivering, his body aching, his mind a chaotic whirl of fear and longing. This was his first night alone, truly alone, in the wilderness. It was a terrifying introduction to a world he never knew existed, a world far removed from the pampered existence he had always known. He closed his eyes, wishing for the dawn, wishing for the impossible, to wake up and find himself back in his warm bed, safe and sound, his family's familiar scent surrounding him once more. But the night, vast and indifferent, offered no such solace, only the cold, hard truth of his new, solitary existence. The first faint streaks of dawn, a pale gray bleeding into the ink of night, offered little comfort to Buster. He uncurled himself from the fatal position, his limbs stiff and aching, his fur damp with dew and the lingering chill of the forest floor. His stomach growled a hollow protest, a constant reminder of his desperate need for sustenance. He stretched slowly, gingerly, each muscle protesting the night's cold and the unfamiliar hardness of his makeshift bed. The forest, though still largely silent, held a different quality in the morning light. The shadows were less menacing, the trees less imposing, and the air, though still crisp, carried the promise of warmth from the rising sun. Yet the sense of utter loneliness remained, a heavy weight in his chest. As he began to tentatively explore his immediate surroundings, his mind drifted back to the comforts of his former life. He remembered the soft, luxurious feeling of his memory foam bed, the specific spot where the morning sun would hit it just right, warming his fur. He recalled the distinct aroma of his human mother's coffee brewing, a comforting scent that signaled the start of a new, happy day. He could almost taste the crunchy goodness of his favorite kibble, the occasional meaty treat, the cool, refreshing water from his ceramic bowl. These memories, once a source of comfort, now felt like cruel taunts, highlighting the stark contrast between his past and present reality. He found himself sniffing at patches of moss, at fallen leaves, at the base of trees, not just for potential food, but for any familiar scent, any lingering trace of his family. He imagined Lily's soft hands stroking his head, Tom's playful tugs on his tail, the reassuring presence of his human father's heavy footsteps. Each memory was a small, sharp pang of longing, a desperate yearning for the warmth and security he had so carelessly left behind, or rather, had been left behind from. He wandered aimlessly for a while, his nose to the ground, his tail drooping. The forest floor was a tapestry of scents, a complex language he was only just beginning to decipher. There were the sharp, metallic tangs of rodent, the earthy musk of deer, the pungent aroma of fox. He caught a distant whiff of something undeniably wild, something larger and potentially dangerous, and a primal fear made the hair on his neck stand on end. His instincts, dulled by years of domestication, were slowly but surely awakening. He was learning to differentiate between the scent of potential food and potential predator, between a safe path and a hidden danger. His ears, once attuned to the gentle hum of the refrigerator or the specific squeak of his favorite toy, now picked up the faintest rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the subtle snap of a twig. Every sound was a clue, every scent a piece of information in this new, unforgiving world. The urge to find food became paramount. His stomach growled again, louder this time, demanding attention. He spotted a patch of berries, bright red against the green foliage. He sniffed them cautiously, remembering a stern warning from his human mother about eating wild plants. But desperation was a powerful motivator. He nudged one with his nose, then another, before deciding against it. His instincts, even in their nascent stage, told him to be wary. He needed something more substantial, something less ambiguous. He noticed a small, muddy stream winding its way through the undergrowth. Water, a surge of relief washed over him. He trotted towards it, his thirst suddenly overwhelming. He drank deeply, the cold water a welcome balm to his parched throat. It was not the pristine, filtered water from his bowl, but it was life-sustaining, and for the first time since his escape, a tiny spark of hope flickered within him. He was still lost, still alone, but he had found water. It was a small victory, but in this vast, indifferent wilderness, it felt monumental. The journey, he realized, was not just about finding his family. It was about surviving long enough to even have a chance. And survival, he was quickly learning, was a lonely, relentless battle. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of hunger, searching, and the constant awareness of his own vulnerability. Buster had, by now, left the immediate vicinity of the suburban woods, pushing deeper into what felt like a truly wild expanse. The houses had long since vanished, replaced by an endless sea of trees, their canopies forming a dense, green roof that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. He had crossed several winding paths and a surprisingly busy 2-lane road, the memory of the roaring vehicles and the near misses still sending shivers down his spine. Each step took him further from the world he knew, plunging him into an alien landscape where the rules were harsh and unforgiving. The forest was a symphony of new sounds and smells, a stark contrast to the familiar cacophony of the city. He heard the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distinct calls of birds he'd never encountered, and the haunting hoot of an owl that made his fur prickle. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and the pungent, unmistakable aroma of wild animals. His nose, once accustomed to the nuances of human perfume and freshly baked cookies, was now a finely tuned instrument of survival, picking up the faintest traces of rabbit, deer, or the more ominous scent of a predator. He learned quickly that his golden fur, once a source of pride, now made him stand out in the muted greens and browns of the forest. He sought cover under thick bush, behind fallen logs, and in the shadows of towering trees, trying to blend in, to become invisible to unseen eyes. The playful, clumsy Buster of the Miller household was slowly giving way to a leaner, more cautious, and instinctively driven creature. His movements became more fluid, his steps more deliberate, his gaze constantly scanning his surroundings. He discovered that the forest, while beautiful, held its own dangers. He learned to avoid certain thorny bushes, to navigate around patches of stinging nettles, and to be wary of the slippery moss on damp rocks. He saw a snake slither silently across his path, its scales shimmering in the filtered light, and he instinctively gave it a wide berth, a primal warning echoing in his mind. One afternoon, while following a faint game trail, he stumbled upon a clearing. It was a small, sun-drenched patch of grass, surrounded by a ring of towering fir trees. In the center of the clearing, a deer grazed peacefully, its head occasionally lifting to scan its surroundings. Buster froze, hidden by a thicket of ferns, his heart pounding. He had seen deer before, from the safe confines of his human father's car, but never like this, so close, so wild, so utterly unconcerned by his presence. He watched, mesmerized, as the deer continued to graze, its movements fluid and graceful. It was a moment of profound realization for Buster. This was their world, the animals of the forest. He was an intruder, a stranger in their ancient domain. The deer, with its watchful eyes and powerful legs, was a symbol of wildness, of an existence untethered by human hands. He felt a strange mix of awe and a deeper sense of his own displacement. He was no longer just lost, he was alien. As the deer eventually ambled away, disappearing into the dense trees, Buster cautiously emerged from his hiding spot. The clearing, now empty, felt different. He was no longer just looking for a way back to his old life. He was beginning to search for a way to simply exist in this new one. The comfort of his past was a distant memory, a fading dream. The cold, hard reality of his present was all that mattered. The forest had become his home, whether he liked it or not, and he knew, deep in his canine soul, that he had to learn its ways or perish. The thought was chilling, but it ignited a spark of fierce determination within him. He was a survivor, even if he didn't know it yet. The gnawing hunger was no longer just an ache. It was a constant, demanding presence, dictating Buster's every move. He had tried to ignore it, to rely on the fading memories of his full food bowl, but the reality of his empty stomach was undeniable. He had to eat, but what? His domesticated palate was accustomed to carefully prepared meals, not the raw, untamed offerings of the forest. His first attempts at foraging were clumsy and mostly unsuccessful. He tried sniffing out berries, but his innate caution, a leftover from his human family's teachings, kept him from sampling any he wasn't absolutely sure of. He pawed at the ground, hoping to unearth some hidden tuber, but only succeeded in getting dirt under his claws. He even tried to catch a grasshopper, a futile effort that left him feeling foolish and even hungrier. He watched the smaller creatures of the forest, squirrels scampering up trees with nuts, birds pecking at seeds, mice darting through the undergrowth. Their ease and efficiency at finding food highlighted his own inadequacy. He was a large, golden, slightly bewildered creature in a world designed for smaller, faster, more instinct-driven hunters. One morning, following the scent of a scurrying creature, he stumbled upon a patch of wild mushrooms. They looked innocent enough, but a strong, pungent odor emanated from them, and his instincts screamed a warning. He remembered his human mother's voice, sternly telling him no whenever he tried to sniff at unfamiliar plants in the garden. He backed away, a tiny victory of caution over desperation. It was a slow, arduous process of trial and error. He learned to distinguish between edible roots and poisonous ones, to identify certain safe berries, and to avoid the tempting but dangerous scraps left by larger predators. His senses became sharper, his focus more intense. He was no longer just sniffing for familiar scents. He was actively hunting, even if it was just for a fallen apple or a forgotten nut. One afternoon, a stroke of pure, unexpected luck. He was exploring near a small, trickling waterfall. His ears perked when he spotted a glint of silver in the shallow pool at its base. A fish. It was small, no bigger than his paw, but it was unmistakably food. His heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He had never hunted anything alive before. His prey had always been a squeaky toy or a tennis ball. This was different. This was real. He approached the water cautiously, his body low to the ground, his golden fur blending surprisingly well with the dappled sunlight and the wet earth. He watched the fish, mesmerized by its darting movements. He remembered watching his human father fish once, patiently waiting by the riverbank. He didn't have a rod or bait or even a net. He only had his paws, his teeth, and his burgeoning instincts. He waited motionless for what felt like an eternity. The fish swam closer, oblivious to the large golden predator lurking at the water's edge. Then, in a sudden burst of primal energy, Buster lunged. His front paws splashed into the water, his jaws snapping shut with surprising speed. A moment of thrashing, a flash of silver, and then triumph. He had it. He pulled the wriggling fish onto the bank, shaking his head slightly, water spraying from his fur. He looked at his catch, a strange mix of pride and revulsion warring within him. It was raw, scaled, and still faintly twitching. He hesitated for a moment, then, driven by an overwhelming hunger, he devoured it. It was not the gourmet meal he was used to, but it was nourishing, satisfying, and a profound victory. This small act of successful hunting marked a significant turning point. It wasn't just about food. It was about empowerment, about discovering a strength and capability he never knew he possessed. He was no longer just a lost pet. He was a survivor, a creature capable of fending for himself. The taste of wildness, though strange, was also the taste of independence, a bitter but necessary lesson in his arduous journey. He was learning to live, truly live, in the wild. Buster's small victory with the fish, while a crucial step in his adaptation, also instilled in him a deeper understanding of the forest's pecking order. He was no longer just seeking food. He was also keenly aware that *K* could be food for something else. The forest, with its abundant life, was also teeming with predators. His senses, sharpened by necessity, were constantly on high alert. He learned to differentiate the harmless rustle of a squirrel from the more deliberate tread of a larger animal. The distant howl of a coyote, a sound that once might have made him curious, now sent a shiver of primal fear down his spine, prompting him to seek immediate cover. One crisp autumn afternoon, as he cautiously explored a new section of dense woods, a sudden movement caught his eye. A flash of reddish-brown fur, a bushy tail, and two piercing, intelligent eyes. It was a fox, sleek and swift, darting through the undergrowth with an almost ethereal grace. Buster froze, hidden behind a thick cluster of ferns, his heart thumping against his ribs. He had seen foxes before, in nature documentaries on his human family's television, But seeing one in the wild, so close, was an entirely different experience. This was not an image on a screen. This was a real living hunter, swift and silent, perfectly adapted to its environment. The fox, seemingly oblivious to Buster's presence, was intently focused on something in the leaves. A moment later, it pounced, disappearing into the foliage, only to re-emerge with a small, struggling mouse clamped firmly in its jaws. The efficiency, the ruthless precision of the hunt was a stark lesson for Buster. He watched as the fox disappeared again, melting into the shadows, leaving behind only a faint, musky scent. The encounter left Buster with a profound sense of his own vulnerability. He was a large dog, yes, but he lacked the innate cunning and stealth of a true wild predator. He was still too loud, too clumsy, too easily distracted by the lingering hope of human kindness. He realized that while he had managed to catch a small fish, he was still far from being a master hunter. He was still a domesticated dog trying to survive in a wild world, and the gap between the two was vast. The fox encounter instilled in him a new level of caution. He began to move more slowly, more deliberately, mimicking the stealth he had observed. He learned to use the wind to his advantage, approaching potential food sources from downwind so his scent wouldn't give him away. He started to pay closer attention to the tracks on the ground, the broken twigs, the disturbed leaves, subtle signs that spoke volumes to the creatures of the forest. He became more adept at finding safe spots to rest, places where he could see without being seen, where he could hear without being heard. He found a hollow under a massive ancient cedar tree, its roots forming a natural sheltered alcove. It wasn't as deep as he would have liked, but it offered protection from the elements and a good vantage point. As the days grew shorter and the air grew colder, Buster's golden fur began to thicken, a natural adaptation to the changing seasons. His body, once soft and low-fed, was now lean and wiry, honed by constant movement and sparse meals. His instincts were slowly replacing his learned behaviors, shaping him into a creature more suited to his harsh new reality. He still thought of his family, of course. The memories still brought a pang of longing, a quiet ache in his chest. But now, these memories were intertwined with a fierce resolve to survive. He would learn. He would adapt. He would become a creature of the wild, if that's what it took to stay alive. The hunter's shadow had taught him that the forest was a place of both sustenance and danger, and he had to be constantly vigilant, constantly learning if he was to navigate its treacherous paths. His survival was no longer a hope. It was a grim, determined mission. Buster's journey was not a linear path. It was a winding, often confusing odyssey through varied landscapes. One of the most significant challenges he faced, besides hunger and the fear of predators, was navigating the geographical obstacles of the wild. He had already crossed a busy 2-lane road in the suburbs, a terrifying dash that had left him trembling. But the wilderness presented its own, equally formidable barriers. Wide rivers and, occasionally, the unexpected intrusion of human infrastructure. He followed game trails, sniffed out deer paths, and generally tried to stick to the less traveled routes. But sometimes an impassable thicket or a steep incline would force him to diverge. This often led him to larger, more menacing human thoroughfares. One morning, after days of following a small stream, he found himself at the edge of a wide, roaring river. It wasn't the gentle, babbling brook he had drunk from. This was a powerful current, churning and frothing, its surface glinting ominously under the morning sun. He stood at the bank, a wave of despair washing over him. He knew how to swim, of course. Lily and Tom had often taken him to the lake for playful splashes, but this was different. The sheer force of the current, the chilling cold of the water, and the unknown depths filled him with a profound dread. He walked along the bank for what felt like hours, searching for a shallower crossing, a narrower point, a fallen log to use as a bridge, but the river remained wide and relentless. He whined softly, a sound lost in the rush of the water. His path was blocked. His instinct, however, driven by the relentless urge to keep moving, to find his family, would not let him give up. He remembered the feeling of the cool lake water, the joy of paddling with his paws, the exhilaration of reaching the shore. He took a deep breath, gathered his courage, and with a nervous glance at the churning water, plunged in. The shock of the cold was immediate and intense, stealing his breath. The current grabbed at him, trying to pull him downstream, to drag him under. He paddled furiously, his powerful golden retriever legs working overtime, his head held high above the spray. Fear was a cold knot in his stomach, but determination, a new, fierce quality, propelled him forward. He fought against the current, inch by agonizing inch, his muscles burning, his lungs aching. He thought of his family, of their warm embrace, of everything he was fighting to get back to. That image, that memory, was a lifeline in the frigid water. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his paws scraped against the muddy bank on the other side. He scrambled out, shaking violently, water streaming from his fur. He collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, his body trembling from exertion and cold. But he had done it. He had crossed the river. It was a monumental victory, a testament to his growing resilience. Not long after, another human intrusion, a paved road, wider and busier than any he had encountered before. The sound of speeding vehicles was deafening, a constant, terrifying roar. He watched, hidden in the bushes, as monstrous metal boxes hurtled past, their speed and size making them seem like unstoppable predators. The smell of exhaust fumes burned his nostrils, a harsh contrast to the clean air of the forest. He waited patiently for what felt like hours, for a break in the traffic, a window of opportunity. Each time he thought he saw an opening, another vehicle would appear, forcing him to retreat. This was a different kind of danger than the wild, a man-made threat that was utterly alien to his instincts. Finally, with a desperate surge of courage, he saw his chance, a brief lull in the traffic. He bolted. He ran as fast as his weary legs could carry him, a golden blur across the black asphalt. The roar of an approaching truck filled his ears, a terrifying crescendo, but he pushed harder, his heart hammering. He made it to the other side, diving into the ditch, trembling but safe. He had faced the wild, and he had faced man's creations, and he was still here. Each obstacle overcome chipped away at his domesticated past, forging him into something stronger, more resilient, more fiercely alive. His journey was a relentless test, and with each passing day, Buster was passing it. The subtle changes had been creeping in for weeks, almost imperceptibly at first. The leaves, once a vibrant green, had begun to turn, first to muted yellows, then to fiery reds and oranges, painting the forest in a breathtaking yet ominous display. The air, once warm and humid, now carried a distinct crispness, especially in the mornings and evenings, hinting at a deeper chill to come. Buster, whose internal clock was now solely governed by the sun's position and the ambient temperature, felt these changes acutely. His thick golden fur, once a luxurious coat, now felt inadequate against the steadily dropping temperatures. He found himself seeking out sunny patches more frequently, curling tightly in his makeshift shelters, trying to absorb every last ray of warmth. The ground, once soft and yielding, had become harder, colder, and often frosted with a delicate layer of ice in the early hours. The foraging became more difficult. Many of the berries he had cautiously learned to identify were now gone, either eaten by other animals or withered by the cold. The small rodents he sometimes managed to catch were scarcer, burrowing deeper into the earth in preparation for winter. The streams, once flowing freely, were now edged with thin sheets of ice, making drinking a more perilous endeavor. Each day was a stark reminder that time was running out, that the benevolent autumn was slowly but surely giving way to the harsh, unforgiving grip of winter. The urgency of his survival intensified. He spent less time simply wandering and more time actively searching for food and, more importantly, for a more permanent, secure shelter. The fallen logs and shallow alcoves that had sufficed in early autumn now offered insufficient protection against the biting wind and the plummeting temperatures. He knew with a primal certainty that he needed something more substantial, something that could shield him from the elements that were rapidly becoming his greatest adversary. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a palette of bruised purples and deep blues, a new chilling sensation filled the air. It wasn't just cold. It was a damp, biting cold that seemed to sink into his very bones. A fine mist began to fall, turning the air hazy and the ground slick. He found a hollow under a rocky overhang, the best he could manage at the moment, and curled up, shivering uncontrollably. The mist soon turned into a light, almost ethereal rain, which quickly transformed into something else entirely. Small crystalline flakes began to drift down, swirling in the dim light, catching on his fur. Snow. Buster had seen snow before, of course. He loved to play in it, to pounce on the soft white drifts, to catch flakes on his tongue. But this was different. This was not playful snow. This was the first harbinger of winter's true power, a cold, silent warning. The flakes settled on his fur, melting initially, then clinging, making him feel even colder and wetter. The ground began to turn white, erasing the familiar landmarks, transforming the forest into a stark, monochrome landscape. He watched the snow fall, his breath misting in the frigid air, a profound sense of despair washing over him. How could he survive this? How could he find food when everything was covered in this cold, white blanket? The memories of his warm home, of the roaring fireplace and the cozy blankets, surged back with an almost unbearable intensity. He yearned for it, for the warmth and security, with every fiber of his being, but there was no turning back. He was here in the cold, and winter was coming. He had to prepare. He had to find a way. The encroaching cold was not just a physical discomfort, it was a relentless enemy, pushing him to his absolute limits, forcing him to adapt or succumb. He closed his eyes, his mind racing, trying to conjure a plan, a strategy, anything that would allow him to face the brutal season ahead. The challenge had just begun. The first snowfall was a stark wake-up call, transforming Buster's survival from a daily struggle for food into a desperate quest for warmth and shelter. The small rock overhang he'd found was barely adequate against the biting wind, and the relentless cold had seeped deep into his bones. He knew he couldn't survive the full brunt of winter without a more substantial refuge. His internal clock, now finely tuned to the rhythms of the wild, urged him to find a safe haven before the true onslaught. Days were spent relentlessly searching. He sniffed at every crevice, every pile of fallen branches, every hollow in the ground. He observed the smaller animals, watching where squirrels burrowed and where foxes disappeared into dens. He was no longer just a lost pet. He was a student of the wilderness, learning its ancient lessons of survival. The forest, once a confusing maze, began to reveal its secrets. He learned that certain rock formations offered better protection from the wind, that the base of a particular large fir tree could create a natural lean-to, and that thick, intertwined roots often concealed hidden cavities. His paws, once soft and sensitive, were now toughened by endless miles of rough terrain, but the cold still seeped through, making them ache. One frigid afternoon, following a faint game trail that seemed to wind deeper into an untouched part of the forest, Buster caught a whiff of something promising. It was a faint, earthy scent, mingled with the dry aroma of decaying leaves and the subtle musk of a creature that had once called this place home. He followed the scent, his tail giving a tentative, hopeful wag. The trail led him to a small, secluded ravine, sheltered on three sides by steep, rocky inclines. At the base of the largest incline, almost entirely hidden by a tangle of thorny bushes and hanging vines, was a dark opening. It wasn't a cave, not in the traditional sense, but more of a deep overhang, a natural cavity carved into the rock face by centuries of erosion. It was small, just big enough for him to squeeze into, but it promised something he desperately craved: true shelter. Cautiously, Buster approached. He sniffed at the entrance, his hackles slightly raised. The scent of the previous occupant was old, faded, but still present. Whatever had lived here was long gone. He squeezed through the narrow opening, his golden fur scraping against the rough rock. Inside, it was surprisingly dry and still. The air was colder than outside, but it was a still cold, free from the biting wind that had plagued him for weeks. The floor was a bed of soft, dry leaves accumulated over years, creating a natural insulation. It was dark, a profound darkness that swallowed even the faintest glimmer of daylight, but it was safe. It was a den. He circled a few times, pushing the leaves into a more comfortable mound, then curled up, his nose tucked into his tail. For the first time in weeks, he felt a profound sense of security. The raw, exposed vulnerability that had been his constant companion began to recede, replaced by a nascent feeling of relief. This was not the plush comfort of his memory foam bed, but it was a refuge, a stronghold against the coming storms. He spent the next few days meticulously improving his den. He dragged in more dry leaves, pushing them into a thicker, warmer bed. He scoured the surrounding area for fallen branches and smaller pieces of rock, using them to partially obscure the entrance, making it less obvious to prying eyes and helping to trap what little warmth he could generate. His instincts, once dormant, were now fully engaged, guiding him, pushing him to prepare, to survive. As the sky outside darkened and the first flakes of a heavier snowfall began to drift down, Buster lay in his den, listening to the wind howl outside. He was still hungry, still alone, but he was no longer exposed. He had found his sanctuary, his shelter from the storm. The battle for survival was far from over, but he had won a crucial skirmish, securing a place where he could at least face the coming winter with a fighting chance. Winter arrived with a brutal, unforgiving force, transforming the familiar forest into a desolate, monochrome landscape. The first heavy snowfall, a swirling blizzard that lasted for 2 days, buried the world under a thick blanket of white, trapping Buster in his newly fortified den. He huddled deep within the layers of dry leaves, listening to the howling wind and the ceaseless whisper of falling snow, a sound both terrifying and strangely hypnotic. The cold was a constant, gnawing presence, seeping through his fur, chilling him to the bone despite his efforts to stay warm. His breath misted in the frigid air of the den, and every movement was an effort. His body, already lean from weeks of sparse meals, now burned precious calories just to maintain his core temperature. He could feel his strength waning, his energy reserves depleting at an alarming rate. When the blizzard finally abated, revealing a world transformed, Buster cautiously emerged from his den. The sight that greeted him was both breathtaking and terrifying. The trees, once vibrant with autumn colors, now stood stark and skeletal, their branches laden with heavy snow. The ground was a pristine, unbroken expanse of white, stretching as far as the eye could see, obscuring every familiar landmark, every potential food source. The streams and small rivers he had learned to rely on for water were now frozen solid, their surfaces covered in thick, unyielding ice. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of his own paws on the snow and the occasional creak of a snow-laden branch. The world felt utterly still, utterly dead. The challenge of finding food escalated dramatically. The small rodents he had learned to hunt were now deep in their burrows, protected by layers of snow and frozen earth. The few remaining berries were either buried or frozen solid, inedible. He spent hours, days, painstakingly digging through the snow, his nose to the ground, searching for any scent, any trace of something edible. His paws became raw and cracked from the freezing snow and ice, but he pushed on, driven by the relentless ache in his stomach. He tried gnawing on frozen roots, but they offered little nourishment and were hard on his teeth. He licked at patches of clean snow for water, but the icy liquid did little to quench his thirst and only made him colder. Desperation began to set in, a cold, creeping despair that threatened to extinguish the spark of determination he had cultivated. He was weaker, slower, and the sheer scale of the winter landscape seemed insurmountable. The forest, once a source of both danger and opportunity, now felt like a vast, empty prison. He would often lie in his den, shivering, dreaming of his warm home, of the hearth fire, of his family's comforting presence. The memories were a bittersweet torture, offering a fleeting warmth before the harsh reality of his situation crashed back, leaving him colder than before. One particularly brutal night, the temperature plummeted to unprecedented lows. Buster huddled in his den, trembling uncontrollably, his body shaking with an intensity that went beyond mere shivering. He felt his eyelids grow heavy, a dangerous drowsiness creeping over him, tempting him to surrender to the cold embrace of unconsciousness. He fought it, forcing his eyes open, forcing himself to move, to shift, to do anything to stay awake, to stay alive. He remembered his human mother's voice, telling him stories of Arctic explorers and their fight against the cold. He was no explorer, just a dog, but the will to live, the primal instinct for survival, was strong within him. He was a small golden speck against the vast, indifferent power of winter, but he was still fighting. He was still breathing. And as the first faint hint of dawn touched the horizon, painting the snow-covered world in a fragile, pearly light, Buster, though weaker than ever, knew he had survived another night. Winter had him in its grasp, but he was not yet broken. He was still here, enduring, clinging to the smallest flicker of hope in the vast, white silence. The relentless grip of winter tightened, pushing Buster to the absolute brink of his endurance. His body, once robust and powerful, was now gaunt and skeletal, his ribs clearly visible beneath his matted golden fur. His movements were slow and deliberate, each step a conscious effort to conserve his rapidly dwindling energy. The constant hunger had evolved into a dull, persistent ache that never truly subsided, accompanied by a profound weariness that made every waking moment a struggle. The pristine snow, once beautiful, was now a cool barrier, hiding all potential food sources. The forest was silent, almost devoid of life, as most creatures either hibernated or had moved to warmer climes. Buster's usual foraging grounds yielded nothing but frozen earth and brittle branches. He had to resort to desperate measures, pushing past his ingrained domesticity and embracing the raw, primal instincts that whispered to him from the depths of his canine soul. He learned to track. His nose, once used for sniffing out dropped crumbs and familiar human scents, now meticulously followed faint trails in the snow, the delicate paw prints of a mouse, the bounding marks of a rabbit, the almost invisible path of a vole. He moved with a new stealth, his large body surprisingly quiet as he navigated the frozen landscape. He spent hours watching, waiting, his patience honed by desperation. He learned to read the subtle signs of the wild, a disturbed patch of snow, a faint scent on the wind, the sudden silence of a bird. One afternoon, after days of fruitless searching, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A squirrel, bolder, or perhaps more desperate than most, was attempting to dig up a buried nut near the base of a snow-laden pine. Buster, hidden behind a thicket of snow-covered bush, remained motionless. His heart pounded with a mix of adrenaline and a fierce, almost terrifying hunger. This was not a game. This was survival. He waited, his muscles coiled, until the squirrel was completely engrossed in its task. Then, with a sudden, explosive burst of speed that surprised even himself, he lunged. The squirrel, startled, bolted, but Buster was faster, driven by an instinct he never knew he possessed. He caught it, a flash of brown fur and a desperate squeak. The act was quick, brutal, and profoundly unsettling. He had never taken a life before, never truly hunted in this raw, unforgiving way. His upbringing had taught him to be gentle, to protect, not to kill. But as he devoured the small creature, the warmth of the fresh meat, the sudden surge of energy, silenced the pangs of guilt. This was the price of survival. This was what the wild demanded. He also became a scavenger, discarding any lingering notions of dignity. He would follow the flight patterns of crows, knowing they often gathered near the remains of larger kills. He would cautiously approach the faint scent of a carcass, his hackles raised, always on the lookout for the original predator. He found the frozen remains of a deer, picked clean by wolves, and gnawed on the bone fragments, extracting what little marrow remained. It was meager, but it was enough to keep the faint spark of life flickering within him. His body was a testament to his ordeal. His once luxurious golden fur was now dull, matted, and often encrusted with ice. His eyes, once soft and trusting, held a new, wary glint, a reflection of the harsh realities he had faced. He was a survivor, forged in the crucible of winter, stripped of his domestic comforts, and pushed to the very edge of his primal being. He was no longer just Buster, the pampered pet. He was a creature of the wild, driven by the fundamental imperative to endure no matter the cost. His journey was a testament to the incredible will to live, even when all hope seemed lost, even when it meant sacrificing a part of his former self to survive. A fluffy, well-groomed golden retriever dog, Buster, even in the profound silence of winter, some sounds carried further, cutting through the stillness with an unsettling clarity. Buster had heard the distant howls before, faint and mournful, carried on the frigid wind. He had felt the primal shiver that ran down his spine, a warning from the deepest parts of his canine ancestry. But one particularly cold night, as he lay huddled in his den, trying to coax warmth from the dry leaves, the howls were closer, clearer, and far more menacing. They were the calls of a pack of coyotes, perhaps even wolves, their voices echoing through the frozen forest like a chorus of hungry ghosts. The sound was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't the playful bark of a neighborhood dog or the sharp yelp of a fox. This was a guttural, ancient sound, a declaration of territorial claim and a chilling promise of predation. Buster tensed, every muscle in his emaciated body rigid. His ears swiveled, trying to pinpoint the direction, to gauge the distance. He could almost feel their presence, a collective hunger moving through the darkness, a force far greater than any single predator he had encountered. His den, which had felt like a fortress against the wind and snow, now seemed flimsy, vulnerable. He was a large dog, yes, but he was alone, weakened by hunger, and cold, and utterly lacking the pack instincts that would allow him to either join or effectively fight off such a formidable threat. He was an anomaly, a domesticated creature trying to survive in a world where only the truly wild thrived. He remembered the protective instincts of his human family, how they would shield him from perceived dangers. Now, there was no one to protect him. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. He listened, his breath shallow as the howls moved, circling, seemingly drawing closer to his ravine. He could hear the distinct sound of paws crunching on the snow, the rustle of undergrowth, faint but undeniable. They were hunting. And he, a large, solitary animal, might very well be considered prey. A wave of profound fear washed over him, a cold dread that surpassed even his hunger and the biting cold. This was not the fear of starvation, but the fear of being hunted, of being overwhelmed by a superior, organized force. He pressed himself deeper into his leaf bed, trying to make himself as small and invisible as possible. He scarcely dared to breathe, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He imagined their glowing eyes in the darkness, their sharp teeth, their collective strength. He was a golden retriever, bred for companionship and gentle retrieves, not for battle against a wild pack. The howls continued for what felt like an eternity, sometimes fading into the distance, sometimes seeming to draw alarmingly close. Each time they sounded further away, a fragile sense of relief would wash over him, only to be shattered by a renewed chorus that seemed to shake the very ground. He knew they were marking their territory, communicating, but he also knew they were searching, their keen noses sifting through the frigid air for any scent of weakness, any sign of a solitary animal. As the night wore on, the howls eventually began to recede, growing fainter and fainter until they were nothing more than a ghost of a sound, swallowed by the vast silence of the winter night. Buster lay there for a long time, trembling, long after the last echo had died. His muscles ached, not just from the cold, but from the prolonged tension. He felt utterly drained, emotionally and physically. The encounter had left him with a renewed understanding of his precarious position in the wild. He was strong, yes, but he was also vulnerable, a solitary target in a world where strength often lay in numbers. He had survived the night, but the memory of the pack's howl, a chilling reminder of the ever-present danger, would forever be etched into his memory, a constant companion in his arduous fight for survival. The relentless cycle of cold, hunger, and fear had begun to take its toll. Buster, once a vibrant, energetic dog, was now a shadow of his former self. His golden fur, once a source of pride, was dull and matted, encrusted with ice and burrs. His body, skeletal and weak, moved with a slow, painful shuffle. The constant fight for survival had drained him, not just physically, but emotionally. The spark of determination that had fueled him through the early days of his journey was now a flickering ember, barely holding against the crushing weight of despair. He hadn't found substantial food in days. The snow had deepened, making hunting impossible, and the cold was more biting than ever. He would spend hours in his den, shivering uncontrollably, trying to conserve every last ounce of warmth, his mind a chaotic whirl of hunger pangs and fading memories. The dreams of his warm home, of his family's loving touch, were now less frequent, replaced by the stark, brutal reality of his present. He would often lie there, his eyes half closed, feeling the profound weariness settle deep into his bones. The thought of simply giving up, of succumbing to the cold and the hunger, began to whisper to him, a seductive promise of release from the relentless struggle. He was tired, so incredibly tired. He missed the simple comforts, the effortless provision of food and water, the security of a roof over his head. He missed the sound of Lily's laughter, the feel of Tom's hand on his head, the gentle murmurs of his human parents. The longing was an unbearable ache, a wound that never healed. One morning, Buster emerged from his den into a world that seemed colder and more desolate than ever. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, pristine and untouched, signifying another fruitless day of searching. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, carrying with it a chilling reminder of his isolation. His paws, raw and aching, sank deep into the drifts with every step. He tried to sniff for tracks, for any sign of life, but the cold had dulled his senses and the snow had erased all traces. He stumbled, his legs almost giving out beneath him, and fell into a snowdrift. For a moment, he simply lay there, the cold snow a temporary soft embrace. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on his fur in a distant memory, hearing the happy barks of other dogs in a long-forgotten park. He could almost feel Lily's small arms around his neck, hear her whispering, "Good boy, Buster." The hallucination was so vivid, so real, that a single tear, half frozen, tracked a path down his matted cheek. He was dying, he knew it. The strength was gone, the hope was fading, and the will to fight was almost extinguished. He lay there, contemplating surrender, letting the cold seep into his core, letting the darkness take him. It would be an end to the pain, an end to the hunger, an end to the crushing loneliness. He was just a dog, lost and forgotten, and perhaps this was simply his fate. But then a flicker, a faint, almost imperceptible image in his mind, not of comfort, but of his family's faces, their love for him, their unwavering belief in him. He remembered Tom's voice. Buster's the strongest dog in the world. He remembered Lily's determined chin, her refusal to give up on a puzzle. They wouldn't give up on him. He couldn't give up on himself. With a guttural whimper that was half sob, half growl, Buster pushed himself up. It was a Herculean effort, each muscle screaming in protest. He stumbled, fell again, but clawed his way back to his feet. He was weak, he was cold, he was starving, but he was not dead. Not yet. The hope was fading, yes, but it wasn't entirely extinguished. It was a tiny, defiant spark in the vast, cold darkness, urging him to take just one more step, and then another, and then another. He didn't know where he was going or what he would find, but he knew with a renewed, desperate certainty that he had to keep moving, he had to keep fighting, he had to keep living. Driven by a flicker of renewed, desperate hope, Buster pushed on, his movements slow and agonizing. He no longer followed game trails or sought out familiar landmarks. The snow had erased them all. He moved purely on instinct, a primal urge to simply go to keep moving, to find something, anything, that might offer a chance at survival. His senses, though dulled by hunger and cold, were still attuned to the subtle nuances of the forest. He sniffed the frigid air, hoping for the scent of prey, but there was nothing but the metallic tang of ice and the clean smell of snow. He listened, straining his ears, but the world was largely silent, muffled by the deep drifts. Then a new scent, faint, almost imperceptible, carried on a gentle eddy of wind. It was not the musk of an animal, nor the scent of decaying leaves. It was something different, something he hadn't encountered in weeks. A chemical tang mixed with something earthy, something vaguely human. Buster hesitated. His experiences with human presence in the wilderness had been mixed. The terrifying roar of vehicles, the indifference of passersby, but the scent was different. It wasn't the fleeting exhaust of a car. It was a more settled, more lingering aroma, like wood smoke, or something vaguely metallic, but also something warm, something hinting at shelter. Caution warred with desperation. His instincts screamed for him to be wary, to hide, to avoid the unpredictable nature of humans. But his hunger, his cold, his profound weariness screamed louder for warmth, for food, for a temporary respite from the relentless battle. He chose the latter. He followed the scent, his nose to the ground, his eyes scanning the snow-covered landscape. The scent was faint, almost teasing, appearing and disappearing with the capricious wind. It pulled him in a direction he hadn't considered before, away from the deep forest, towards what appeared to be a slightly less dense area, where the trees were still thick, but less ancient, less foreboding. He stumbled through the snow, his legs burning, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Each step was a monumental effort, but the tantalizing scent, a promise of something other than the cold, empty wilderness, spurred him on. He imagined a warm fire, a bowl of food, a soft place to rest. He knew these were likely pipe dreams, but the mere thought was enough to keep him moving. As he progressed, the nature of the forest began to subtly change. The trees became somewhat smaller, younger, and the undergrowth a little less dense. The faint, almost invisible tracks he occasionally encountered were not just those of deer or rabbit, but of something else, a boot print, perhaps, or the faint impression of a snowshoe. He was still in the wild, but he was approaching its edge, moving towards a boundary where the untamed met the tamed. The ground began a gentle slope downwards, leading him into a small, sheltered valley. Here, the snow was slightly less deep, and the wind, though still present, was less fierce. The scent grew stronger, more defined. It was definitely wood smoke, the comforting, earthy smell of burning timber, mingled with the faint, savory aroma of cooking meat. His stomach gave a violent lurch, a painful reminder of his extreme hunger. He paused, hidden by a cluster of snow-laden pines, and peered cautiously through the branches. In the distance, through a gap in the trees, he saw it. A plume of gray smoke rising into the frigid air, and beneath it, just barely visible, a small, rustic cabin nestled deep in the valley. A faint golden glow emanated from a single window. It was a beacon, a tiny island of human life in the vast, indifferent ocean of winter. His heart pounded, a mixture of fear and an overwhelming, almost unbearable hope. He had found something. An unseen path had led him to an unexpected possibility. The decision now was whether to approach, to risk everything for the promise of warmth and food, or to retreat into the familiar but deadly solitude of the wild. After weeks of fighting for every breath, for every meager scrap of food, the choice seemed clear. He would approach. He had nothing left to lose. The sight of the small cabin, nestled in the valley, was like a mirage after weeks in the desolate wilderness. It stood as a tiny beacon of warmth and human presence, its single glowing window a mesmerizing counterpoint to the endless, cold expanse of snow and trees. Buster remained hidden in the cover of the pines for a long time, his body trembling, not just from cold, but from an almost overwhelming mix of fear and desperate hope. His instincts, sharpened by weeks of brutal survival, screamed at him to be cautious. Humans could be unpredictable, dangerous, or simply indifferent. But the competing instincts, the deep-seated yearning for companionship and the desperate need for sustenance, pulled him forward with an almost irresistible force. The scent of wood smoke was now strong, comforting, mingling with the savory aroma of something cooking, a smell that made his empty stomach ache with an intensity he hadn't felt in days. He could almost taste the warmth, the food, the safety that emanated from that small glowing window. He took a hesitant step, then another, slowly emerging from the tree line. The snow crunched loudly beneath his paws, each sound amplified in the profound silence of the valley. He moved with a new kind of stealth, not the stealth of a predator, but the quiet, cautious approach of a desperate creature seeking succor. His tail, usually a barometer of his emotions, was held low, almost tucked between his legs, a sign of his apprehension. As he drew closer, he could discern more details. The cabin was rustic, built of rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney from which the smoke gracefully curled. A small pile of chopped firewood lay neatly stacked beside the door. There were no sounds of children, no bustling activity, only the quiet hum of human life, a gentle presence. He peered through the window, his nose almost touching the cold glass, his breath fogging the pane. Inside, a single lamp cast a soft golden glow over a sparsely furnished room. A crackling fire danced in a stone hearth, its warmth radiating visibly. An elderly man, his back to the window, sat in a rocking chair by the fire, reading a book. He was alone. The sight was profoundly comforting. This wasn't a bustling family home, but a quiet, solitary refuge, and the man seemed peaceful, unthreatening. Buster watched him for a long moment, observing his calm demeanor, his gentle movements. The man occasionally reached down to pet a small, scruffy terrier mix that lay curled at his feet, eliciting a soft whine of contentment from the smaller dog. The sight of another dog, warm and safe, brought a fresh wave of longing to Buster's heart. He missed the companionship, the shared warmth, the simple joy of another canine presence. He whined softly, a low, hesitant sound that barely escaped his throat. The old man, engrossed in his book, didn't hear him. Buster tried again, a slightly louder whimper, his tail giving a tentative, almost imperceptible wag. This time, the terrier's ears pricked up. It lifted its head, sniffed the air, and then let out a soft, questioning bark. The old man lowered his book, turning his head towards the window. Buster froze, his heart pounding. Had he been seen? Would he be chased away? Would this last fragile hope be shattered? The man's eyes, kind and crinkled at the corners, scanned the darkness outside. He saw Buster, a golden form half hidden by the falling snow, a stark contrast against the white landscape. There was no alarm, no anger, only a quiet surprise, and then a slow, gentle smile. He rose from his chair, moving with a deliberate slowness, and walked towards the cabin door. Buster's body tensed, ready to bolt, but something in the man's eyes, a profound sense of calm and understanding, held him rooted to the spot. The man opened the door, a wave of warm air and the tantalizing scent of cooking food washing over Buster. He spoke, his voice low and gentle, words that Buster hadn't heard directed at him in weeks, words that sounded like music to his ears. "Well, hello there, stranger. You look like you've had quite the journey." The decision was made. The choice was clear. The warm glow, the gentle voice, the promise of safety. Buster took a tentative step forward, his tail giving a stronger, more hopeful wag. His long, arduous journey might finally be coming to an end. A fluffy, well-groomed golden retriever dog, Buster. The cabin door creaked open, and the wave of warmth that spilled out was almost overwhelming. It carried the rich, comforting scent of wood smoke, simmering stew, and something else, the clean, reassuring smell of a cared-for home. Buster hesitated, a lifetime of instinct to be wary of strangers warring with the desperate yearning for that warmth, that food, that safety. The old man, whose name Buster would soon learn was Silas, stood in the doorway, a calm, unhurried presence. He didn't rush, didn't make any sudden movements that might startle the emaciated golden retriever. He simply stood there, his gaze soft and patient, a silent invitation in his kind, crinkled eyes. "Come on in, boy," Silas murmured, his voice a low, raspy rumble that was surprisingly gentle. "No need to freeze out there." His scruffy terrier, a grizzled old dog named Patch, trotted to the doorway, sniffing the air cautiously. Patch looked at Buster with a mixture of curiosity and a canine understanding of shared hardship. He gave a soft, welcoming whine, a signal that this was a safe space. The combination of Silas's gentle voice and Patch's silent invitation was enough. With a hesitant step, then another, Buster crossed the threshold. The warmth enveloped him instantly, a blissful sensation that brought a shiver of profound relief. He felt his stiff muscles begin to relax, the tension that had been a constant companion for weeks finally starting to ease. He took in the small, cozy cabin, the crackling fire in the hearth, the simple wooden furniture, the scent of warmth and safety. It was nothing like his opulent home, but it was everything he needed. Silas closed the door softly, sealing them inside, away from the biting cold. He didn't immediately approach Buster. Instead, he simply knelt by the hearth, stoking the fire, allowing Buster to acclimate, to feel safe. Buster, still wary, found a spot near the wall, away from the direct heat of the fire, but close enough to feel its blessed warmth. He lay down, his body trembling, his eyes fixed on Silas. Patch, after a moment of assessment, patted over to Buster. He sniffed at his matted fur, at his gaunt frame, a silent recognition of the ordeal Buster had endured. Then, with a gentle nudge, Patch lay down a comfortable distance away, a quiet gesture of companionship. After a few minutes, Silas rose and went to a small cupboard. He returned with a bowl of water and a plate of what looked like leftover stew, its savory aroma making Buster's stomach lurch violently. Silas placed the food and water on the floor, a few feet from Buster, then returned to his rocking chair, giving Buster space. "There you go, fella," he said softly. "Eat up. You look like you need it." Buster stared at the food, his eyes wide. It was more food than he had seen in weeks, warm and fragrant. His primal instincts, dulled by starvation, surged to the forefront. He approached the bowl cautiously, sniffing at it, then, unable to resist, he began to eat. He ate slowly at first, as if afraid it would be snatched away. Then, with increasing speed, devouring the stew and lapping up the water until both bowls were empty. The warmth of the food spreading through his body was a sensation he had almost forgotten, a profound comfort after weeks of gnawing hunger. When he was finished, he looked up at Silas, his eyes conveying a silent, heartfelt gratitude. Silas smiled, a genuine, gentle smile that reached his eyes. "Good boy," he murmured. "There's more where that came from." Buster, sated for the first time in what felt like an eternity, felt a profound wave of exhaustion wash over him. The immediate threat of starvation was gone, replaced by the overwhelming desire for rest. He curled up on the warm wooden floor, near the fire, near Patch, and for the first time since he had left his home, he allowed himself to truly relax. He drifted off to sleep, not with the fitful, fear-ridden sleep of the wild, but with the deep, peaceful slumber of a creature finally safe, finally cared for. A hand had been extended, and Buster had taken it. His survival alone was over. His recovery, and perhaps a new chapter, had begun. Buster's first night in Silas's cabin was a blur of deep, restorative sleep, punctuated only by the occasional crackle of the fire and the comforting presence of Patch curled up nearby. He woke slowly, stiff and sore, but with a profound sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. The morning light filtering through the small windows seemed softer, warmer, less harsh than the relentless glare of the winter sun in the wild. Silas, a man of quiet routine, was already awake, stoking the fire and preparing a simple breakfast. The aroma of coffee and cooking oatmeal filled the cabin, a symphony of comforting domesticity. Buster watched him, still wary, but with a growing sense of trust. Silas spoke little, but his actions were filled with a gentle kindness that transcended words. He offered Buster another generous bowl of stew and fresh water, watching with a quiet satisfaction as the golden retriever devoured it. Over the next few days, Buster's recovery was gradual but steady. The constant fear and hunger began to recede, replaced by a burgeoning sense of security. Silas never pushed him, never forced him to do anything. He simply provided food, water, warmth, and a quiet, consistent presence. He would sit by the fire, reading his books, occasionally murmuring soft words to Buster or Patch. Buster spent his days alternating between deep sleep by the fire and cautious exploration of the small cabin. He learned that Silas was a recluse, a retired woodsman who preferred the solitude of the forest, but who possessed a deep empathy for its creatures. Patch, the scruffy terrier, became a quiet companion, a bridge between Buster's wild past and his domestic present. They would lie together by the fire, sharing warmth, occasionally exchanging soft nudges and sniffs. The companionship, after weeks of profound loneliness, was a balm to Buster's soul. Silas gently began the process of physical recovery. He carefully cleaned Buster's matted fur, removing burrs and tangles, his hands slow and patient. He examined Buster's raw paws, applying a soothing salve, his touch gentle and reassuring. Buster, who had flinched at any sudden movement in the wild, now leaned into the gentle ministrations, a soft rumble of contentment rising in his chest. As Buster's strength returned, so did some of his old personality. A hesitant wag of his tail, a soft nudge for a head scratch, a playful nip at Patch's ear. He was still leaner, his eyes still held a hint of the wildness he had endured, but the essence of the old Buster, the loving, gentle golden retriever, began to re-emerge. One afternoon, while Buster was dozing by the fire, Silas spoke, his voice thoughtful. "You're a long way from home, aren't you, boy?" He paused, then continued, almost to himself, "You have a family, I can tell. A good one." Buster lifted his head, his ears perked, sensing the significance of the words. Silas then pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound book from a shelf. It was a local newspaper, several months old. He pointed to a small article, its print faded. It was a lost pet notice accompanied by a slightly blurry photograph of a handsome golden retriever. Buster. The description matched him perfectly. His heart gave a strange lurch. His family, they hadn't forgotten him. They had been looking for him. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. Relief, joy, but also a strange sadness. A realization that his wild journey was truly coming to an end. Silas made a few calls on an old, crackling satellite phone. The connection was poor, but eventually he managed to reach the local animal shelter, providing them with the details. It was a long shot, he explained, given the distance and the time that had passed, but it was a chance. Buster watched, his emotions a turmoil, as Silas spoke into the receiver, describing him. He had been found. He had been rescued. The journey from comfort to cold and back to the edge of comfort was nearing its conclusion. The gentle rescue had given him not just warmth and food, but a chance to return to the life he had once cherished, a life he had thought was lost forever. The call from Silas had set in motion a chain of events that, to Buster, felt like a dream. After weeks of silent solitude, the cabin was suddenly bustling with activity. Animal control officers, then eventually a local sheriff, arrived, their faces etched with disbelief at the story of the golden retriever found so far from any known residence. They checked Buster's microchip, a tiny implant he'd long forgotten, and the information confirmed it. He was Buster, the beloved pet of the Miller family, lost for months. The news, relayed over crackling phone lines, brought tears of joy and disbelief to the Miller household. They had mourned him, believing him lost to the vastness of the world, never imagining he could have survived such an ordeal. The reunion was orchestrated carefully, a long drive for the Miller family to Silas's remote cabin. Buster, his heart a frantic drumbeat against his ribs, waited. He could smell them before he saw them, the familiar, irreplaceable sense of Lily, Tom, his human mother, his human father. Their car, worn and mud-splattered, pulled up to the cabin, and then they were there. Lily, now taller, burst out first, followed by Tom, then his parents. They ran towards him, tears streaming down their faces, calling his name. Buster, oh, Buster. He bounded towards them, his tail a frantic blur, a joyous bark erupting from his throat. He leaped into Lily's arms, then Tom's, smothering them with wet kisses, whimpering with an almost unbearable joy. His human mother knelt, burying her face in his fur, her sobs shaking his body. His human father, usually stoic, knelt too, his hand stroking Buster's head with a reverence that spoke volumes. It was a reunion of pure, unadulterated love, a testament to an unbreakable bond. The journey from comfort to cold and back to comfort was complete. The Miller family thanked Silas profusely, offering him rewards he gently declined, his eyes twinkling with quiet satisfaction. Buster nudged Silas's hand with his nose, a final heartfelt goodbye to the man who had saved him. He also nudged Patch, a silent promise of friendship. Back in his own home, Buster found his plush bed, his favorite toys, his overflowing food bowl. The comforts were all there, familiar and welcoming. But Buster was not the same dog who had left. He was leaner, his fur still bore the faint marks of his ordeal, and his eyes, though filled with love for his family, held a new depth, a quiet wisdom. He still enjoyed his belly rubs and his walks in the park, but he no longer took them for granted. He would often gaze out the window, his ears perked, listening to the distant sounds of the wind, his mind drifting back to the vast, silent forest. He was more observant, more cautious, and surprisingly, more content with quiet moments. He no longer chased squirrels with the same heedless abandon. He watched them with a knowing gaze, a silent understanding of their struggle. He would often seek out the children, nudging them gently, as if to remind them of the preciousness of their time together. His bond with his family was deeper, forged in the crucible of separation and survival. He was their Buster, yes, but he was also Buster, the survivor. The golden retriever who had faced the wild and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger. His journey had taught him the harsh realities of life, but it had also shown him the incredible power of resilience, the unwavering will to live, and the enduring strength of love. He was home again, forever changed, a testament to the extraordinary spirit of a dog's survival alone.